How many of you have actually seen the Tesla Go Electric site? Good. I thought maybe you might be here for the free Wi-Fi. So the idea of this talk is really to provide kind of a real-world implementation of kind of an advanced website. And a lot of the talks that we're attending today talk about very deep dive specific technologies, and this is really just to talk about a project, a full life cycle in terms of how we implemented it all the way from design, all the way through to fixing bugs, and just talk about what we learned through that process. The ultimate goal for us is we learned a lot of things through this process that now when we talk to new clients about building these types of experiences, we actually have a lot more knowledge to share and things that we would do in terms of best practices to when we approach complex builds like this. So hopefully you find that interesting. My partner in crime today is Matt Bennett. He's actually one of the developers. We have two other developers that worked on the project here as well. We've got Warner Witt and we've got Ben Wigton. And they're all the developers that help build this particular experience. So what we thought is at the end of the talk, if you've got specific questions, you can just come on up and ask these guys questions. And these are all the guys that helped build it, and they've got the answers for you as well. So quick plug, what is Jibo? Jibo is a digital agency here in San Francisco. We have about 40 employees. We do everything from branded experiences to user experience design, all the way through to development. We do both desktop specific builds, and as you can see, we've also done a lot of mobile experiences, both web optimized and native applications for mobile devices. So these are some examples of things that we've built recently, and actually almost all these guys that helped build this also helped build these experiences. So very lucky to have this talented team here working with the company. As a digital agency, just one thing I wanted to point out is that we're pretty technology agnostic. We're here just like you guys are to learn about what's new, what's cool, what we can use to help build amazing experiences for clients moving forward. We're technology agnostic. We've done big Java projects. We've done big PHP projects, used a bunch of CMSs, and know a lot of the challenges of implementing these kind of interactive experiences with really deep integrated and interactive UI. So from that perspective, these guys have a lot of those experiences as well. So let's talk a little bit about Go Electric. So the experience that you're looking at on the web is really a reimagination of an experience that was already built as part of their studio. So if you've ever been down to Palo Alto or one of their Tesla studios, you know they have an extremely controlled environment where they make it immersive in terms of how you get and understand how a Tesla car works. And as part of that, they have this experience that is about a 60-inch touchscreen that hangs on the wall called Go Electric. I don't know if you've ever checked it out, but it's an incredible design, highly interactive, and it works extremely well on touch. And we didn't develop that. That was developed by a company here in the city called Otopod. So they did the original design and Air application development for that experience that's hanging on the wall. I don't know if any of you work at Otopod, but it's an amazing job. And really for us, the opportunity was for Tesla to now take this kind of to a broader audience of people. So a couple of things. If somebody's standing in front of this experience at the studio where they sell the cars, if one person's at it, nobody else can participate. The other thing is they know that a lot of people with iPads are interested in taking a look at this as part of just browsing their website. So they wanted to get it on an iPad, get it on the desktop. They wanted to actually be able to hand out iPads in the store to augment the story that's hanging on the wall, and then also have salespeople walk people through this as well. I'm sure many of you heard about the recent New York Times article about mileage of an electric vehicle. So there's a lot of angst from people who are buying electric vehicles about how far they can go. And there's primary 5 questions. You'll see when we get into this, there's 5 questions that most people have about ownership of an electric vehicle. And that's really the goal of this experience, is to address those. and now for us to make it available across a bunch of browsers and the iPad. Having worked in the digital agency world, one of the most critical things that we do at the beginning of any project is to understand what the compatibility is, because we know that any additional compatibility added to this type of grid can mean significant amount of work on our part in terms of either retrofitting or bug fixing. So we actually, as a best practice, we highly suggest you establish these kind of criteria, work with your clients to understand exactly what kind of desktops. In fact, one of the things that we do recommend is that either you ask for a report from their Google Analytics or their analytics platform, or ask for access so that you can validate what are the top browsers and platforms, so you know exactly how to build a targeted environment. One interesting thing is we didn't build this. A lot of the folks at Tesla, especially ones that work in marketing, come from an Apple pedigree, so they really don't care too much about Android tablets. But we did test this after the fact and found that it did work on the Jelly Bean Chrome browser, for example, on a Google Nexus 7, for example, which is a very popular tablet these days. One thing actually to point out, you may not be aware, but an Android tablet is running a different build of the browser than a handheld device. The handheld devices are running, which is called Android browser, and the tablets run the Jelly Bean Chrome browser, which is much more akin to the desktop Chrome browser. So we were responsible for translating that very landscape-oriented 1080p experience down to making it work within 1,000 pixels on the desktop, and obviously making it work on the iPad mini, for example, at 1024 by 768. So we had to work very closely with our designers to be able to take all those assets, to take some of the layout, and to come up with a way that we can tell this story about how far can you drive in an electric vehicle. And initially, as part of this, we had come up with a story where there were actually little leaflets that were coming out from each of the dashboards so that you could kind of navigate in kind of a serpentine fashion through the experience. And this was critical because we actually did a quick little ping animation example of it and showed it to a client on an iPad, and they decided right away that wasn't going to work for them, that they actually needed a very linear story that was kind of touch swipeable. So that was really critical. The other thing that was really important was the proof of concept. I was actually really nervous when we signed up to build this, taking advantage of all this. There's a lot inside each of these dashboards. We'll show one in a moment. There's a lot of knobs, sliders, calculations that are happening. We really weren't sure we could make this into a kind of a responsive desktop application that would really run pretty well on a desktop browser. So this was around the time when Adobe Edge Animate was coming out. So I decided that was a really great tool to kind of do a quick test of using CSS3 transitions to see what wheels would spinning on the car would look like, based on also implementing sliders that did calculations and showed updates. And we found out that actually it performed pretty well, so we were pretty committed to building out all these dashboards as part of this single scrolling experience. The great thing for us as well, we did have the Air application that was running in the stores. We were able to get that running on our local workstations. So we set up our QA person, for example, with QA so that basically they could A/B the Air application against what we were building. Now that's great, but actually what that also means is that the expectation of what we built, it should actually behave a lot like a native touch application running on a desktop. So we had a pretty high bar in terms of how this thing should work. The other great thing is the client provided some inspirational sites. I don't know if you're familiar with Slavery Footprint. If you're not, you should check it out. It's actually a really immersive, fun site that deals with a very complex topic. I think it was built by Unit 9 here in the city. They did an amazing job on that. Definitely check that out. And then there's another site called Smart Power Generation. And the things that came out of this is they wanted things that that differentiated the Air experience on the iPad, for example. They wanted things like parallax, so motion. They wanted interactivity, so when you interact with different dials and sliders, they wanted fun things to show up. And we'll show some of those when we walk through the experience. Oh, I actually did want to point out, we did end up, let's see if I can get out. So just to talk about where we ended up, we have obviously this main masthead. This is integrated with Tesla's CMS platform. But where we did end up is basically where we have this intro slide, which sets up the question. We've got an animation slide. So there's some fun animation. And then we have what we are calling the dashboard. So whenever we refer to a dashboard, we're talking about these interactive pages. So you'll see that there's some fun things that happen. The biggest one was when you switch. Oh, here's a little, I don't know if you guys noticed, but when you click on this, you'll see the windows go up and down. So there's a lot of little fun things that happen as part of the experience. So now we're going to go back and just talk a little bit about how we approach building this. So there's really no pre-built framework for us to build something like this in. So we needed to basically start from scratch. Matt was actually instrumental in coming up with some of the framework that we use. We started with an HTML5 boilerplate, and we use Ant for building the experience. As part of that boilerplate, you get Modernizer 2, which for us we tended to use for feature detection specific to the touch devices. So for us, we knew that we needed to be able to transition the experience from a desktop experience that has a lot of knobs and sliders over to something that's touch-enabled like an iPad. All the dashboard views are built on, actually the framework in general is all built on Backbone.js, which at the time, I know the 1.0 recently came out, so we built this last year, so this is on .9. Basically, each of the views are built individually, and then they're all pulled together as a single router. There's custom events and key value binding that's implemented to pull all those models together. I'll let Matt talk a little bit about that. But one thing we needed to do because of the timeline for the project was allow multiple developers to work on the project at one time. And we knew that basically dealing with code checking collision was going to become a problem. So each of the dashboards are separated into a separate Backbone view. So that would allow actually each developer to work and check in that single standalone view and have it render, and even have it render as a separate page. So even our QA person could do a pre-QA or help them with unit testing across all the different browsers and devices. I don't know if you have anything you want to add to this.
Sure. So with HTML5 boilerplate and Ant, we were primarily using it to minify and concatenate our JavaScript and cascading style sheets and kind of pull together the meat of the page and bundle it into a test environment that we could deploy on our test QA site, and then also that we could change a few local properties to build a fully functional production site. Like Doug said, using Modernizer 2 for primarily touch-enabled devices so that we could make differentiations between the desktop and some of the interactions you get with mouse versus the iPad and a lot of the touch swipe, touch start, touch end, touch move, and how they relate to things like our sliders and our, can we switch back to the dashboard? Yeah. Sure. So using the different inputs like the sliders, the radial input here that allows you to adjust speed, some of the touch-enabled, this is desktop here, of course, on the laptop, but being able to use these touch-enabled sort of like picker views for selecting the temperature outside, as well as what model of vehicle you're interested in driving. And all of these selections adjust how far you can go with a certain battery that's installed in the car. We'll switch back. Yep. So we use a lot of Backbone's built-in model structure for custom events and key value binding for when selections are made with the different widgets. And like Doug said, we were able to split up the development into separate panels, each panel having its own Backbone view for custom interactions so that the three of us could kind of develop in our own silos, checking code, and let the automated ant task build the site for us when we were submitting updates.
Actually, another thing to point out that I just thought of as well, we were very fortunate working with Tesla. Tesla's all about innovation, obviously an innovative company. We were allowed to pick and choose what technology we used when we built this. They really didn't set any guidelines for us. So one very fortunate thing is we had experience based on using Backbone in previous projects. They didn't force any particular technology on us. We do have other clients that have very specific based on things that they have implemented in their CMS. So one of the things to think about when we did approach this was making sure that we could reuse technology that we had already been up to speed on and did have some investment of some of the framework stuff that was already done. And in some sense, the Backbone framework that we're talking about that we used for this was actually implemented for another project in some sense and tested. So we were very confident that we were able to use that. It wasn't kind of all net new from that perspective. So the dashboards themselves use a pretty big range of third-party add-ons for jQuery. We use Tween.js. There's jQuery mouse wheel. We also use for all the different sliders and controls. There's third-party controls that we use for that. There is as part of the AIR application, there was already a calculation engine that was already built to do the calculations for, I've made an adjustment on a parameter, and how does that actually show up in terms of how it affects overall mileage. So we leveraged some of the existing code and just translated that to kind of a web world. One of the interesting things that we found out was actually all those values that were used for the calculations were in CSV format in the AIR app, and we know that's probably not optimal for the web. So actually Ben ended up writing some code in order to get it into a JSON format to get it over into the web app. And one of the most important things is we were able to use Typekit web font. So having a web font available reduced significantly some of the development time around having to produce the customer-specific font that we use Proxima Nova, actually, in fact, for this experience, so that we didn't have to produce all the individual image assets and do all the animations against all those. We could actually just use the web font and update web font properties in order for display. I don't know if you want to talk a bit about some of the other details around the dashboards.
Yeah, so the dashboards themselves are primarily the meat of the site. I mean, users are going to the dashboards to figure out, in this case, how far I can go on, or I'm sorry, what's my range on a battery on the highway based on my driving conditions, whether or not I drive, 65 miles an hour in the winter, whether it's nighttime out with the windows down, which would be pretty cold with my 21-inch wheels. So that all affects how far the car can go with the 3 battery types. And like Doug said before, all this data in the AIR app was stored as a CSV file for one per scenario. So this would be one CSV file where it would be nighttime, 21-inch wheels, windows down, 32 degrees, 65 miles an hour on the highway. We had to take all those CSV files, and Ben wrote a really nice ant task so that when he could run this simple ant task, it would take all of the CSV files, compile all of the data into a JSON format that we could load once into the site and rapidly look up exactly the the ranges that we need for these specific scenarios.
So one of the key things, as you might have noticed when I was scrolling in the site, is there's a line that goes through the experience. You'll notice that the line gets painted red. You'll see that certain things that get activated based on position on the screen. You'll see a hamburger get eaten. You'll see a bird kick up a comment. So there's a lot of things that are interactive in terms of the animations based on position. So we put a lot of thought into that. And we ended up coming up with basically a customized scroll tracking system in order to activate all those things based on position in the application itself. So this is actually not done through Canvas or WebGL. This is all done through DOM. And while that was, we'll find out in lessons learned, where that was a good thing for us in terms of leveraging some of the skills that we already had. Just overall DOM complexity ended up becoming part of an issue. So that's how that's all actually implemented. The one thing you'll notice is the vertical line was pretty easy in terms of the way the manipulation is done through the DOM and showing and hiding basically what's happening through imagery and placing of a div. But you'll notice that there's, on the horizontal lines, they either go left to right or right to left. And there had to be two separate images and divs that handled either left to right or right to left changing of the color. So that was some custom code that had to be written in order to handle that show hide display specific to the way it was tracking. So that was something that we actually hadn't planned on. There's also sprite animations that we used. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about how those were implemented.
Sure. I'll switch back.
Yeah.
Did I lose my resolution? No. So we have some sprite animations here that are we implemented with Sprightly.js, which is just a sprite sheet animation JavaScript library, and it allows us to create the left to right scrolling background, the road lines, and the wheels spinning. A lot of these sprite sheets, particularly the wheels, were created with Adobe Flash CS6, exported from the library as a sprite sheet, a movie clip exported as a sprite sheet animation, optimized for web, and then imported and controlled with, or loaded just as a ping, and then controlled with the Sprightly library. Sprightly also allowed us to create this left to right motion with the different the lines and the backgrounds as they change when you are switching, say, from, if we could turn that off, from highway to city. You get a different cityscape that comes up, and allowed us to create that effect. So it's a pretty good library for us in this instance.
As I mentioned, the calculation formulas were provided to us by the client in AirApp. There's some very specific business things that are happening there. Nothing that we really added to that, just translating that to something that integrated with the typekit font, web font that's implemented on the site. As we mentioned, we did have structured CSV. Ben used Rhino plus the AMP build to convert those to JSON objects. And those are for the MPG and total car range. We've used Rhino, Ben specifically has used Rhino as well for other projects for kind of these transformations of content. If you want to get a little more detail on that, you can speak to him about it. We also mentioned that we use a lot of third-party plugins. These make me nervous whenever I work on a project and we use them. We know that we've got a little bit of time, but we can't build out all this stuff from scratch, so we pick and choose what we pull down from the web. And interestingly enough, for like Tiny Circle Slider, jQuery Range Slider, and Sprightly, we did have to dig in and fix some very specific browser compatibility issues as needed. So if you are building something like this and you're using third-party plugins, you have to be willing to dig into some of these third-party plugins. And also, the other thing to note, and we've worked with other clients, they don't really accept the licensing for some of these. So you also just have to be prepared if you are using them, understand how these things are licensed open source or what they use, and that the client's comfortable with that as well. We've mentioned we relied heavily on using a web font. If you guys have ever used a web font, make sure whatever web font you're using, you test across all the range of browsers that you have in your compatibility matrix. They will render differently. It will render differently on every different browser because the rendering engines are different, especially older versions of IE. It's going to look great on the latest version of Chrome. It's not going to look as good on an old version of IE. So definitely do that test at the beginning of the project. The other thing is we did, as I think Matt mentioned earlier, we did have to address handling of events differently for a mouse on a desktop versus touch interaction. So there was a lot of code that was written using Modernizer to handle those events differently on a desktop. So basically there was two sets of code that had to be built, one for desktop and one for touch. Because this thing, I mean, ultimately they said that the primary experience had to work on an iPad first, then desktop second. We were talking about, I'm sure a lot of you have to deal with Internet Explorer workarounds. You know, do we have to say any more? It's a pain in the butt. But it's just the nature of our business. We have to fix these issues. I don't know how you guys estimate how much time you spend fixing IE bugs. We definitely see across all of our projects somewhere between 25 to 30% of our time is just fixing IE bugs. In this particular project, it was probably a little bit higher given the level of interactivity, but we did have to support all the way back to IE8. And specifically for some of those ping animations that you saw, like the burger getting eaten or the sun and the moon rotating, there were animation transparency issues that needed to be addressed specifically for IE. Classic IE issues are content layout issues due to CSS differences. You have to be aware and be prepared to address those as well. And the other thing we did see is there is a lot of JavaScript for this, obviously with the Backbone framework. And we do see, if you do happen to load this on IE, it is going to take a lot longer to load regardless of your internet speed, simply because of JavaScript performance. So you have to be prepared for experiences that use a lot of JavaScript that load on older browsers. There were some talks earlier from Sencha especially. Those guys seem to have some pretty interesting techniques that you might be able to use around progressive and composite loading that if we had more time, we probably could have figured something out, but we ran out of time in terms of our development effort. Performance optimization, there really wasn't a lot for us to do. We did try to crush, one of the talks earlier today, probably one of the largest things that you have on your page, contributing to page weight is imagery. The Tesla wanted very high quality imagery in their site. We spent a lot of time going back and forth about what's the maximum amount that we could compress and remove some of the artifacts from imagery before we started seeing some pixelization. So we ended up siding on oversizing images rather than quality. That's obviously something you need to work through with your clients. We did minify the JavaScript as part of the deliverable to the client. But as part of this, you're going to find that we did have to spend a lot of time working with our client to set, this is a large site, a lot of imagery, a lot of JavaScript. It's going to take a while to load. It's not going to be sub 2 second, 3 second, even 4 second for the most part. So you have to work with your clients. We did to set expectations. The one thing that would have helped from our case, we did some testing, is if we were able to load a lot of these artifacts, imagery, JavaScript up into a CDN. The client in this case didn't have a CDN available, but that would have helped. So definitely factor that in when you're doing these large single page experiences. Determine whether you have a CDN available up front and figure out how you can get that integrated potentially with like your AMP build scripts, so you're pushing it out.
I'll hop in here. Yeah. Doug talked a lot about the IE8 experience, and one of the things we found that we were able to do, let me switch this back. Just go to, I don't want that one though. was getting the animations to run smoothly on IE8. And there was some sacrifice there, but what we were able to do with our animation engine in some places was use the request animation frame loop to pause some of the animations that, like in the dashboards, as you can see when I'm scrolling here, we have a pause state that allows us to make a little bit smoother scrolling, particularly on older PCs that are still running Windows XP and IE8. Also here with some of these frame-by-frame ping sequences when we're scrolling through the experience, we had to make sure these were optimized for the IE8 platform as well. Some of the sliders, not so much of a big deal, updating these values, but like Doug said, final performance on some platforms required us to use less transparency animations and more just hide and show, kind of a graceful degradation of the site to make it still usable on those platforms. We talked about the images, and here, Tesla's really big on these high quality pings. In a parallax environment, we have separate transparent pings, and to get them to move at separate speeds while we're scrolling, and we were able to use some ping optimization techniques that come with the HTML5 boilerplate ant tasks that helped crush these down and get them as small as they could be, so that when the page loads, you're not waiting around forever. Again, with some of the ping sequences here as we're scrolling through the site, all optimized for IE8 and machines that run that environment.
Come on. So let's talk a little bit about some of the lessons that we learned developing this. One thing that we did learn was, obviously we were taking a landscape-oriented 1080p experience and trying to get it to work and look like a native application on an iPad. We had to spend a lot of time with our designers. Luckily, we had a really great designer on this project who worked through some of the orientation aspects of the design, landscape versus portrait. And in this case, we ended up using viewport scaling to accomplish the goal, along with some minor adjustments made in the layout. For us, we had a well-written reference code base that streamlined development. Unfortunately, many times you won't have that available, but if it is available, don't shun it because it's somebody else's code. Adopt it, take a look at what they do, and see if you can learn something from it. It really did help us. We had, a fixed budget and a fixed timeline in order to deliver this experience. One of the things that might not have been mentioned was the scrolling animations that you see in the experience are timed, very specifically based on position and height in the experience. We didn't really know going into this that we would be doing a lot of relayout of some of the pages based on copy changing. And what that meant is we had to go back and very specifically change X and Y coordinates or of animations happening in the page because they were all hard-coded based on changes in some of the different pages that we had, or the modules that we had in the site. We might have done it differently, but we didn't really expect to have such iterative review of the site and copy updates and imagery updates. So if you do have something in terms of layouts, just make sure you understand that pretty much everything is subject to change, especially around layout. Clients' expectations with interactions were very high. We actually have, in some of the sessions this morning, we have developers who are trying to hit 60 frames per second. If you saw the Facebook application that Centra built, they were hitting 60 frames per second in some of their scrolling. We weren't able to hit that with ours. They spent a lot of time developing some stuff, but you need to pay attention to that. Do a POC, do a proof of concept, put something in front of the client early. We did for every one of these dashboards, when they were done and built, we put them in front of the client as a standalone little page so that we could get feedback early and often. We had a lot of issues with iPad on the interactions for touch that we had to deal with. And at the end of the day, all the interactions that you see on the desktop, so the red line animating, some of the in-page animations for that interactive slide, we ended up having to ditch that. And that was because just the overall DOM size was becoming a problem on the iPad. So scrolling was becoming very choppy because it was under 15 frames per second. We were dropping frames while you were scrolling on the iPad. And the client just couldn't live with it. So we ended up having to rework and come up with a workaround in terms of the way we did the layout on the iPad. If we had more time, I think we could have solved it, but we really just didn't have time on the project to do that. In the end, they were happy with the iPad implementation. It's actually simpler and cleaner anyway. So that's when we ended up developing some additional HTML specific for the iPad. I don't know if you had anything you want to add.
Sure. One of the main takeaways that, at least that I took away from the project, was the proof of concept was really important to transition ideas from the design department and the technology department and showing what could be possible on certain devices, desktop and tablet. And also, you know, our original scroll animation method using the scroll event in the browser was not really usable on the iPad because Mobile Safari pretty much freezes all processes running when someone uses a finger to touch and slide up and down in the browser page. So any set interval you might have running or any set timeout or any loop that's running, Safari will just freeze it until the page has finished scrolling and eased into place. So we came up with a solution to work around that. In the end, on some iPads, like the first generation iPad, it really wasn't very optimal because of the tablet itself couldn't support it. And like Doug said, it was kind of choppy. So we ended up, even though it looked good on iPad 2 and 3, the first generation iPad just didn't cut it. So like he said, you know, we have still have a usable iPad experience that has all of the sliders, range input, radial sliders, touch interactive in the main dashboards that allow you to calculate how far you can go, how many stops you'll have to make on a road trip, et cetera.
A couple of other quick lessons that we learned. There's one area in the experience where we show mapping along with how those states come up with their electricity, and we initially developed it as Highcharts. I don't know if you're familiar with Highcharts. We'll show an example. We have used this for quite a few projects.
There you go.
On this dashboard here. So you notice on the right that animation for the bar chart. We originally developed this, the pie chart in Highcharts as well. You'll notice how the lines are articulated off the pie chart, the layout specific to the copy in each of these. We originally developed these with a lot of time in Highcharts, and we could not get it pixel perfect, and the client couldn't live with it. So we lost about 3 weeks of demo or dev effort. And we replaced it with all static images. Now, we were able to get Highchart to work for this bar chart, but not for the pie chart. It just, we couldn't accomplish everything that we needed in terms of that layout. Highcharts is actually very effective for cross-browser. It even has fallback technology for older IE browsers, and we've worked with a lot of clients that it works well. But unless you really want to dig into its innards, you don't want to commit to pixel perfect layout when it comes to Highcharts. Oop. Hello. The other thing that was really important for this is all the developers on this project, I was pretty lucky, actually came originally from a Flash background. You might ask why that's important. They actually understand, they all had come from a development environment where they did timeline-based development. It included interaction, animation, and this obviously was a highly interactive experience, so we didn't have to go back and forth significantly with the designers. They could use the experience that they had coming from a Flash interactive development environment. If you are working with or scoping out projects like this, factor in the background and the experience of the developers that you have building this. This was huge for us. And obviously, create enough time in the schedule to deal with IE issues. That was probably our last throes of getting this across the finish line, were lots of little issues that we're dealing with for layout with IE.
One other important detail about the Flash development was that our benchmark was the air application. So it was extremely valuable to have 3 developers that had Flash background, knew ActionScript 3, and how an application was built beginning to end, so that we could look into the source code and figure out how a range for the 85 kilowatt battery is calculated when you're driving 45 miles an hour on the freeway when it's 50 degrees out. We were able to look into all the packages and classes rather quickly and efficiently, break down what the original application was supposed to be doing, and then translate it to JavaScript in the backbone views.
All right, so the last question is how long did it take? We had 3 developers dedicated to this project on and off for more than actually 5 months, but it was about a 5-man-month effort in terms of just effort, not duration. It actually took longer in terms of some of the client reviews that we did. So we started around May, and this launched in around December timeframe. If I remember, it was mid-December. We would estimate about 20% we were off in terms of our original estimates. So we were dealing with a fixed price project and with a pretty accelerated timeline. So we really weren't good at estimating. So we learned a lot from this in terms of estimating around the complexity. We also spent a lot of time dealing with layout adjustments due to the redesign of the user experience initially, so we did some rework at the beginning. We talked about the parallax issues and some of the scrolling issues on the iPad. We didn't accommodate for that. That contributed to some of the 20% that we were over in terms of effort. We dealt with integration issues, so this is basically one big page that is plopped into a very open template on their CMS. We dealt with some integration issues getting that integrated with their CMS, especially with their standardized header and footer. So if you're integrating with your clients or implementing in your own CMS, make sure you accommodate for that. We talked about Highcharts. We talked about IE bugs. The other interesting thing is we had to get this working on the Tesla in-car 17-inch browser, and that's a custom WebKit browser, and we found out it doesn't, Modernizer doesn't detect its touch events, so we had to do some custom fixes for that. And testing. For something that's this many browsers, this many devices, planned for upwards of 20, 30% total development effort put aside for basically QA. We had a full-time QA on this for many, many weeks, and I think we looked through this, about 128 or 158 bugs were open. And we estimate, like we said, about 30% of those were IE bugs, but the rest were all layout issues. So start QA early, do it very often if you can. That's it for us. Hopefully you learned something in terms of an approach that you would use to build out a complicated, very interactive experience based on some of our pain. If you have any questions, these guys are going to be hanging out after the session. Come on up and feel free to ask. Thanks for coming.